Welcome back, minors. My name is Amber Johnston, and I'm a counselor at Student Wellbeing, and we are coming to you from our first ever live panel. This podcast is about sleep and what sleep can do for us.
My name is Tracy Kriegel. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, a senior counselor here in Student Wellbeing. Today we're going to be introducing you to our two panelists, Dr. Matt Thimgan and Dr. Elizabeth Dodd. Dr. Matt Thimgan is an associate professor in the Biological Sciences Department. Dr. Matt Thimgan has over 10 years experience in sleep biology, and his research interests are biochemistry, genetics, and the anatomy of sleep. Dr. Thimgan graduated with his doctorate's degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Our second panelist is Dr. Elizabeth Dodd. She's one of our medical directors here at Student Health. Dr. Dodd joined Missouri S&T as the medical director in the summer of 2022. Dr. Dodd attended St. Louis University and received her degree in chemistry. She moved to Kansas City, where she attended medical school and received her final training at the University of Louisville. Let's welcome today both of our panelists and get ready, minors, to have your morning cup of joe.
And now we're going to go ahead and join the podcast as it was recorded on October 25th, 2023.
You hear it all the time, are you getting enough sleep? So today, let's look at what all the fuss is about. How much sleep do we really need? And what happens if we don't get enough sleep? How does sleep affect our brain function? And what can we do if we're faced with insomnia? Have you ever had insomnia?
Sometimes, it just kind of like kicks in and I just can't sleep, but usually I can figure it out. I guess that's the beauty of being a therapist, right?
Yeah.
So you got to put all those coping skills in place and all that good stuff. So, but after we speak to our panelists today, we're going to open the floor to the audience here in the room. So we've got a couple of wonderful students and some staff people here in the room, and we're going to ask those questions that they might have. So, and any websites and additional information will also be linked into the show notes right here with the podcast as they're available. So Amber, let's get ready and hit the floor running, right?
Yep. Minors, it's time for your morning cup of joe.
Woohoo!
So, panelists, what is sleep and why do we need it?
So, that's a good question. Pardon me. And at times it's hard to define, but sleep is a state. It's different from from like your active waking. And the way that we define it sort of scientifically is through brain waves. And so you can actually watch the brain change states as you're going through and sleeping. Ultimately, what is sleep good for? We characterize it as restoration. And usually you feel a lot better in the morning, right? And a good night's sleep, you get up, you're ready for the day. That's how we define sleep in that case.
So what is a good night's sleep? What does that look like? What is it? How do we know we've had one?
We usually define it by how you feel the next day. Go, I got a good night's sleep last night. It's a combination of duration and what we call consolidation. So that quality sleep, not being disturbed by something, not waking up a whole bunch of times in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, all of those things work in combination with duration. So it kind of doesn't matter how much quality sleep you get if you don't get enough. But you can be getting plenty of time and spend a lot of time in bed and not get the high quality, and both of those will sort of result in not feeling your best. And then you compound that night after night, and now we have a situation where people feel really bad.
Right. I think we've all been there.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
Just went to sleep, woke up the next day, and just felt like garbage.
Right. Yeah. I hear that frequently from students. They're like, I slept forever last night and I still woke up tired. So I hear that frequently. So Dr. Dodd, what do you think? What's the average number of hours we should sleep each night?
That's a tough question. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. So I believe the numbers vary somewhere between 6 to 8. Obviously, younger children, right? When you're a baby, you sleep a lot more. You take a lot more naps, right? As you get older, you need a little bit less sleep. Older individuals often have more trouble sleeping as well. So that is going to change throughout the course of your lifetime. But we typically recommend 8 hours is the kind of gold standard. Some people can get by with a little less, some people might need a little bit more. And that's where the quality comes in, right? you could sleep for 10 hours, but if they're poor quality, then that really didn't do you much good, as where 6 hours of quality sleep did help you.
Right. So what about those people who insist that they can only sleep 4 or 5 hours and that's all they need?
That might be true. There are those individuals that can function like that. It really comes down to how well, I mean, if you feel well rested and you're able to achieve your daily goals and work through your studies and stuff, that might be you. And congrats, because I envy you for that, that purpose. But you know, you might, and you can do that for a sustained period of time. That's the other thing, is anybody can kind of get through something. We've all probably had that in our life, like, I just have these next 3 weeks and I'm just gonna power through and it'll be okay. But that's probably not sustainable for the long term. And so you really have to look at how are you, are you going to bed? Are you falling asleep relatively quickly? That's my first question with everyone. You should not be laying in bed. If you're tired and falling asleep, you should get in bed and you should be out within 15 minutes typically. And then you shouldn't be waking up. And when you wake up, usually not to an alarm, although most of us do use alarms just because there's so much going on, but a good quality sleep you would wake up naturally and you would feel awake and ready to go.
Right, yeah. So Dr. Thimgan, speak to those stages of sleep for us, like the cycles of sleep. Can you
Sure.
speak to that for us?
Absolutely. And I just want to add one thing onto what Dr. Dodd said, was you need to be honest with yourself, because a lot of people, as we say, you can get through a lot on low amounts of sleep. But are you sleepy during the day? Do you feel like you're productive and working at your optimal level? If you don't, then you're not getting enough sleep. Mm-hmm. What you can do about that and how to accomplish that, you just need to start thinking about that as a contributor to your health. Because as we now talk about it, there are 3 pillars of health, which is diet, exercise, and sleep. And I think more in the public consciousness, it's becoming more of there's more of an awareness about that. But the more awareness that we can have, the better. So the cycles of sleep are actually important, as Dr. Dodd and I had been talking about a little bit before this, was that people think that sleep is the same at any point, that sleep is sleep is sleep. And that's not the case. Because of circadian rhythms. Our bodies are timed to basically go to sleep at night, and that's when you get your most optimal sleep. And so usually we enter sleep and we go through this period where your brain waves get progressively more coordinated with themselves. So you ignore more and more of the outside influence, and that then your brain goes from pay attention to things outside to paying attention to itself. And so as you go through the stages of sleep, it more and more pays attention to itself. And most likely what it's doing is doing what we call, and you can't see my air quotes at this point, that restorative process where something magical happens when they communicate with themselves. They're probably telling each other, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. And rearranging the metabolites, rearranging your memories, rearranging just information from the day. And so it's now sort of working with itself. And as you go into what we call deep sleep or the slow wave sleep, that's when those neurons are the most coordinated and they're all kind of doing the same thing. So you sort of go through this stage 1 sleep, and then as you go through stage 2 and stage 3, and each one has its own sort of peculiarities and identifying marks, but then you get to the stage where they're all coordinated together. You get this slow wave sleep, and then it hands off to REM sleep. And that people have probably heard of REM sleep. That's where the brain, this is usually called paradoxical sleep, where the brain actually looks like it's awake. So you get this, it's almost indistinguishable from being awake, but the person's clearly asleep. So they said, the brain looks awake, but they look asleep, so it became paradoxical too, because the brain looked like it was awake. And that's where we dream. Is primarily, we do, there's other places that you dream, but mostly it happens in REM sleep. And what we think is going on is there is a neurotransmitter that allows the brain to kind of almost do what it does during the day without moving, without sort of having this sort of consciousness. And so that's where you get these sort of dreams for where you have these fantastical associations of different things. And so that occurs. And so the brain's awake because the brain's actually kind of making up this sort of world and exploring a little bit what happened during the day, mostly with emotional memories. Then we start over. That's about 90 minutes. Then you start over and you go back through that process again, and then it changes over the night. So the second half of the night is different than the first half of the night. So you mostly get slow wave sleep at the beginning of the night, and that's partly circadian governed. So in other words, if you go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, you're more likely to get slow wave sleep. If you start to go to sleep at 4 in the morning, you're more likely to get REM sleep rather than slow wave sleep, which means that you're not getting the same sleep that you were before. So this is where when Dr. Dodd and I were talking about like sleep is not sleep is not sleep, what stages are actually dominant is governed by an internal clock and not necessarily just going to sleep.
Right.
Gotcha.
Wow.
We try to explain to kids because they come in and tell me, well, I sleep 6 hours every night. But my question is to them is, well, what times are you sleeping for those 6 hours? 10 to 4 is not the same as 2 to 8. And they're like, but it's 6 hours. And a lot of our students are very math, driven. And I get it. 6 is 6. I understand, but it's not in this case. The same 6 hours here are not the same 6 hours as over here. And that's why my recommendation always to people is you have to find a time for your schedule where you are going to be able to go to bed roughly about 1 to 2 hours around the same time, and you're going to get up roughly within 1 to 2 hours. I got it. You're college kids. You want to go out and have fun. We all want to do that. But I need you to go to bed, maybe during the week at like midnight, and then maybe on Friday night you stay up till like 2, right? So I have a little bit of a gap there for you, but it needs to be consistent. The back and forth, and then napping thrown inside in the middle of the day is just not restorative.
And there are some very good studies showing that an inconsistent, what they would call center of sleep. So if you take when you start and when you end and you average that, if that bounces around a whole lot, and there's a big difference between those, that can have just as much of an impact on academic performance and brain cognitive performance as not getting enough sleep. Like getting like 4 hours of sleep. So there's a lot of considerations when you're talking about sleep. It's not just duration. It is, there's a lot of components to juggle.
I think that leads to our next question is what happens when you don't get that recommended amount of sleep?
Right, then you don't perform as well. You're not, your memory is going to be lacking, right? So you might have gone over a concept and then you can't seem to remember that concept, or you're sitting in class and the professor is speaking and you're just not following along because you didn't fit it. So you can't focus, right? It's almost has a lot of similar properties as, depression, anxiety, ADHD, any of those things. When anybody comes into the office to see us and they're saying, I am having sleep trouble, we kind of address all of these other points because they're very interrelated. The neurotransmitters are playing a role in your sleep just as much as they're playing a role in these other, issues as well.
Right. Well, we see that frequently over at Student Wellbeing, and that's one of the first things I will ask my students is, how's your sleep schedule? And they'll usually say, I'm not sleeping. Yes. So I see that frequently.
And that's a bi-directional relationship. So sometimes that sleep, the bad sleep is a result of some sort of other disorder, and then so you get into its positive feedback loop. Other times it's driving it. Mm-hmm. And so that's where, if you can get that sleep, it's good to do it because you're in a lucky position that you can change it versus somebody that has another problem and can't change it and then just has to sort of work their way through it.
Yeah, and we try to tease that out as well, and we talk a lot about having a reset period, right? So you can't just be like, okay, for the next day or two, I'm going to go to bed at this certain time and it's going to be fixed, because that's not how it works. I usually recommend or caution people that it's going to take about a month to sort of reset where things are and get you on a solid, pattern. And we have tips and tricks, and sometimes we use a little bit of medications and things to help with those things. But to re-establish kind of that pattern, it takes time. Yeah,
it takes time, and it doesn't always involve pharmacological.
No.
And in fact, there are a lot of different methods for which somebody doesn't have to take a pill or something with side effects. It can be dealt with because it's part of our brain and other things, and behaviors will play into it. I'm sure we'll get to that. But I want to follow up on your original question about what happens. Really the question should be, what doesn't happen?
Right.
And so when we're talking about the immune system, so it gets reduced while you are sleep deprived, and so you'll possibly get sicker if you've had a vaccine. It turns out it won't work as well. If you go in and you're sleep deprived and you get a vaccine, it will not work as well, and therefore you will not get the protection that you had.
The immunity response.
Yes, so it has an effect there. There was a good study that bone development and repair from working out. So growth hormone is secreted at night.
They talk about weight issues too. You actually lose weight most of the time while you're asleep. And so if you're not having that time and that quality of sleep, if you are trying to lose weight because maybe you are a little overweight, your efforts are not going to be as effective as they would be if you were getting good sleep.
And if anybody's listening to this and they're sleep deprived and thinking about it, think about what you eat while you're sleep deprived. There is very good evidence that you want more calorically dense, meaning carbohydrates, sweets, fats,
grease, right?
Grease, when you're sleep deprived versus when you are well rested. And they've shown this by putting on a buffet for people, and they'll sleep deprive them, and they'll just basically watch and weigh what they choose. Fat and sugar when you are sleep deprived, and pretty good when you're not.
Because you're trying to make up that caloric difference, right? You need that energy from somewhere, and so you're going to try to artificially give it to yourself. So caffeine, things like that, right? Sugar and caffeine. Let's go.
So
well, not to mention the eating to stay awake. Like how often, like when you're really like sleep deprived, how often do you just sit there and like munch, like late night to try to keep yourself awake because you don't want to go to sleep?
Yeah. So for us, when I was in college, it was the Maggie Moo run. Did you ever gone to Maggie Moo's?
No. What is Maggie Moo's?
It's an ice cream place.
It's an ice cream place. It's free.
It's like I feel like I'm out of the loop here.
It's just like a Baskin Robbins. Like you would run for ice cream run.
I got what you're talking about.
In college, it was Maggie Moo's at 9:00 at night. We would try to run there right before it closed.
White Castle.
White Castle.
Ours was Shakespeare's Pizza.
I think everybody listening to this podcast has that late night run that you gotta go to.
And notice none of it's a salad.
No, nobody's eating an apple or a salad. It's always a late night run.
No salad.
Yeah, but that's like fixing that grade.
And it's almost to the point where it's a ridiculous joke. Like everybody's like, right? Like that doesn't make any sense in that.
Well, yeah, it makes sense now that you've explained the mechanism of like what we're actually doing when we're doing that.
Yeah.
So that kind of goes into the next question. So if let's say I stay up and I pull an all-nighter one night, and then the next night, can I sleep 12 hours and make up for it, and it all kind of come out in the wash?
So the answer to that is no. It's not a good idea, though it needs to happen. So you do want to try to make up sleep that you don't get. But it's not the same. It's roughly, you'll make up roughly duration-wise about a third of the sleep that you lost. So it will never be a sort of a one-to-one, and as we talked about before, it's going to occur at different times. So no is the answer to that. And in an interesting, way back when, there was a guy named Bill Dement, and he was out at Stanford, and he was one of these people that really brought this into sleep as a clinical condition through sleep apnea. And I would like to sort of put a pin in the sleep apnea and narcolepsy to discuss and just bring that awareness to people that might be listening to this. But he ran something called a sleep camp. And so what he would do, so he'd call all these people in, and Stanford would fund this. They would come in, they'd do sort of activities, but the reason why was to sort of study people's sleep, and they would allow them to sleep 10 hours time in bed. So that's how we measure things. We can't actually say you need to sleep for 10 hours because some people can't. So they would put them onto these in bed for 10 hours and then count how long they would sleep, assuming that 8 hours was the normal duration of sleep. And on average, people were carrying around about 50 hours of sleep debt with them. So it would take that amount of time in order to finally get down to 8 hours of sleep during that 10-hour period. And so they kind of came out and said, this is what people are carrying around with them. And so we all do it because of work. We're up all night doing this. Again, it's necessary, and we can do it. but it's not very good, and then it takes a long time. And we're interested in that recovery sleep. People have spent a lot of time studying the sleep deprivation and what happens and documenting that. We're, as a lab, sort of interested in that recovery time and what actually happens.
So I guess when I'm kind of like hearing a lot of what you're saying is it sounds like we really need some really good time management techniques. We need to really like kind of look at all of our schedules, and those late night runs are really having a huge impact.
Right.
You know, really looking at how do I prioritize, here's my schedule, how do I, and, you know, this is something I talk to my students about when they come over. It's not so much how do I not get sleep, it's how do I get sleep. And you know, okay, here's my schedule. Yeah, I go to class at 10 o'clock, I go to class at 2 o'clock, I go to class at 6 o'clock in the evening, and sleep's on the back burner.
Yep.
It's not my priority. So how can I make sleep a part of my schedule?
Yeah,
and it is a priority.
I like to explain to it that like you need to exactly that, have it as a schedule. It needs to be like a class. Like it's now bedtime.
Yeah.
Like I know we're all adults here, but you need a bedtime.
Yes.
It is
Sorry.
one priority, yeah.
And your parents are probably not here telling you to go to bed, or maybe they are. Maybe they're texting you to tell you to go to bed. I don't know. But you need to just put that down, and that needs to be a hard stop. And that is very challenging to do. But the studies have shown, I'm sure you can speak to that, about that you're not as effective. You're not doing good work. So you might be finishing a paper, or you might be finishing a project, or studying the last chapter. But in all honesty and reality, you're actually probably better off just going to bed and getting up the next day and moving forward and trying to see things there. Because whatever you're trying to capture, it's not going to stick, and it's not going to stay, and it's not worth it in the end. So you just need to stick, like I said, 1 to 2 hour kind of time frame, but you need to have a bedtime and own it, and just tell your friends, I'm sorry, I have to go, it's my bedtime.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Something I really appreciate the university offered students the Better You app this year.
Mm-hmm.
And in that Better You app, we got to kind of trial it, before it kind of came out. And that's one of the things I set as an intention myself, as the sleep app.
Mm-hmm.
I'm terrible. I wholeheartedly admit this. Sleep has always been a challenge for myself, so I'm just kind of outing myself. But I set that as a bedtime challenge for myself, and it tells me when to go to bed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
It
if you
gives me
need
an
that,
hour warning to say you should be preparing yourself for bed right now.
Right.
So, and I like that in the sense that it says, Tracy, stop doing laundry at 10 o'clock at night.
go to bed.
Go to bed,
Yeah.
because type A personality, you got all these things to do, blah, 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 blah. And so it tells you it's time to wrap up and get ready to prepare yourself for
And
bed.
having that hard stop as well for students, like again, a lot of electronics, right? So we can speak to blue light, right,
Blue light.
effects. That's a
Yes.
big topic, right? So you need to, it's funny that the app tells you about an hour ahead of time to go to bed, but you have to also, part of good sleep hygiene is preparing for sleep,
Yeah.
right? And it's not just like, I'm going to put my stuff down and I'm going to lay down in bed and boom, I'm asleep. That's not how it works. You have to kind of, it's almost like preparing a meal to sit down for dinner. You're going to have to take that time to do a little bit of preparation. And, for small children, right, that's like a bath and a book and, a story, whatever, and, tuck you into bed. But you need that for yourself too. So maybe it doesn't look like what it does when you're a small child, but you should have that kind of a plan. Maybe it's 10 minutes of visualization, or 10 minutes of yoga, or maybe your kind of thing is listening to music. We would encourage you to try to stay off of electronic devices that are emitting blue light type situation, dimming lights, right? All of these things are helpful to help you kind of prepare your body to fall asleep.
Yeah, and I would argue that even the bath time, so one of the strategies actually is to take a shower, a warm shower. So one of the cues that our body uses to go to sleep is a temperature drop. So over the night, your body temperature will drop about 0.5 degrees C, so to 1 degree C. So it's about 2.5 degrees. And there was an old sleep researcher that was like, I can tell when someone's asleep by measuring their big toe because the temperature will drop. And that has nothing to do with sleep, but it's just a byproduct of that. And that's so by taking a warm shower, hot shower, and then letting that drop, that is something of a signal to the body to sort of say, okay, prepare for sleep, get ready. Because it's something that needs to happen. It's a slow ramp down. The example that Dr. Dodd gave of like somebody just putting something down and falling asleep, we usually consider that clinically pathological amount of sleep debt, right? It's like if you fall asleep too fast, it turns out that means you have too much sleep debt. There should be a little bit of wind down time, not just like because that's not good either. That's not good.
So this is a totally side question, but you said something about measuring the big toe, and that totally made me think about like how all of us keep that one leg uncovered.
So when we talk about sleep hygiene, the temperature of the room, there are a lot of things that can interfere with your sleep that maybe people don't even realize that are doing. My favorite one was in talking with one of the sleep medicine doctors. They'll go through interviews. That's the first thing they do. Right? It's kind of, they find out about your lifestyle. They ask about what your bedtime, right? Routine, all that's encouraged, blah, blah, blah. And then, so they had this one patient come in and everything seemed good. And they're like, well, okay, so take us through your night, all this. And they're like, well, I go to bed, and then about 3 a.m, the cat comes in and walks on the pillow. And then, okay, great. At 5 a.m, the dog's up and wants to go for a walk. And you start to see this pattern of like, okay, something is interfering with, and it's the pets. And we think of them as our family and that this is just part of it. But yet that's the part that, and this person was blind to it. When it started talking about it out loud, they go, oh, I can kind of see the problem here, right? I get it, but then it becomes what to do about it. But there are things that we just do inherently that can interfere with our sleep. One of those being reading with e-readers, as well as your phones, right, at night. Maybe somebody sits in there with their phone up close. Texting. So I run a sleep class, and in that class I have them do an app. They have to chart something, pick a problem that they think they have, find an app, use it, and graph it, right? So there was somebody that was that basically used the phone silencer, and they documented that their sleep latency went down from about 2 hours. And so the sleep latency is the time that it takes when you try to fall asleep to the time that you can fall asleep. Mm-hmm. It went from about it was over 3 hours to about 20 minutes when they turned off their alerts and texts and things like on the phone, because they feel like they have to respond all the time. And so your bloops and bleeps and somebody's doing this and somebody's doing that.
Full disclosure, mine goes off, my phone is silent at 10 and doesn't turn back on until 7.
Yeah.
So
makes sense.
Because yes, it's the exact same thing. Or with small children, like I have a almost 2-year-old, and so the monitor, right? Various like little things, right? Does the child actually need you versus like it makes a noise and so the monitor triggers and then that wakes you up, right?
Right.
So getting those things set, like going through and figuring out what's going on. I always like to caution people too, and I think it's especially important in the college setting, because a lot of kids are in a dorm and there's not a huge open space, right, where we might go to our living room or have like sit at the kitchen table. We have lots of places to kind of go and be. One of my other biggest points is that your bed is for 3 things and 3 things only: sleeping, if you're sick, or sex. That's it, right? So a lot of kids like to add a 4th S, which is study. And we should not be studying in our beds, right? Because that is, you want to train your brain that this location and environment is for one thing and primarily and one thing only. And so setting up that, but it's hard. I understand a lot of you are in dorms and there's not a lot of space. So that's one of my big things when a student comes in and asks, what are you doing? Like, are you just in your bed all the time? Because that's just like where you live. Like, we need to change that. We need to have different associations, because your body, you're just confusing your body and your brain about what you need to be doing.
So I guess another question, and maybe it's important to bring this in because we know that there's times where people pull in alcohol, and I've heard this. I worked with veterans for a long time, and they'd always say, well, I would just long-term people would drink a beer at nighttime that helped me go to sleep, and
Sure.
it just takes the edge off. And so
Yeah.
I know it's a different population, but on campuses we know people drink a nightcap and go to the bar. But how does alcohol or how does cannabis affect our sleep cycles? Where does that fall in? What does that do to sleep? How does that really affect the sleep cycle?
They both impact sleep, and maybe I can talk about the alcohol. I don't know if you even
Yeah.
talk more about the cannabis on that side. So alcohol, and it is true that alcohol will help you fall asleep. It will also help. I was talking about the slow wave sleep. There does seem to be more slow wave sleep in people that drink. But the trade-off, and it's a really, really big trade-off, comes with REM sleep and your sleep quality throughout that night. You're going to be getting up. Alcohol is an antidiuretic, and so you are going to get up and pee. Even if you haven't had a lot to drink, you're going to get up and pee because that's part of it. Whereas your body normally would say, no, we're not going to do that because it's time to sleep. So it disrupts your sleep. And it also impacts REM sleep. And so it suppresses REM sleep to the point where REM sleep can actually be eliminated in severe alcoholics. Now, it's severe alcoholics, but people that drink routinely or binge drinking sort of have these episodes and they recover. But with alcohol, the REM sleep actually never comes back. So even after they quit drinking, even after all that, it does not come back. And so it has a very serious consequence for that long-term consumption of alcohol. And so in the end, while it does have these properties that maybe people like, which is falling asleep faster, and you can sort of say, oh, look, see, that's good, this slow wave sleep thing is good, the trade-off is probably not worth it in the long term of using that as a sleep aid. Obviously, it's not going to make somebody a teetotaler by saying you're going to lose your REM sleep, and that's different than, let's say, nicotine. So nicotine also will wake you up. It's a stimulant that we put in. So some people will have a cigarette before they go to bed, and you habituate to it. You also, so it has consequences, but once you stop smoking, that seems to rebound back to normal. That you can, if you stop smoking, your sleep seems to return back to normal. Whereas with alcohol, it doesn't necessarily if you have those long-term consequences. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you want to talk about cannabis.
Yeah, cannabis is similar to the alcohol, purpose. So same thing. It's going to necessarily calm you down, right? Everybody feels like the cannabis kind of mellows you out, so then you feel like your thoughts aren't racing. You can fall asleep faster. But then again, the same situation, you're going to have more problems with the quality of the sleep that you're getting, and it's just not going to, provide you with that help. So certainly wouldn't be something, to recommend to be using as a sleep aid. And there are lots of studies out there that show with chronic cannabis use that your academics actually are affected by this too. So now you're having two things. You're taking a hit in your sleep quality, and you're also taking a hit from over here that are affecting, your academics and your performance.
Yeah, definitely a thing to think about.
Yes.
Not doing.
Not doing.
Not doing. So.
While we're on the subject of pharmacologics at this point, melatonin.
Yes.
How do you feel? Because it is
hot
in
topic.
A lot of medications.
Literature.
It's accompanying. Yes.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering your opinion on
Sure.
this. I have my opinions, but
yes. So I find melatonin to be effective at certain times. Melatonin is only so useful or powerful, and so I like to use it after I've done obviously a good clinical assessment and history, right? Because it's not going to overpower if there's something long-term going on. I use it a lot to reset the sleep cycle. That is a very common thing because the kids just really struggle with that. I really want to do this. I'm doing all of the things that you told me. I'm taking the hot, warm bath. I'm turning off the electronics. I'm doing all of this stuff. And I'm just really struggling. And one of the things that our students have the most trouble with is they don't necessarily have time on their side, right? Because this is a very fast-paced, the semesters are very short, tests are coming next week, and there's a lot to do. We don't have the luxury sometimes, and so I will use the melatonin to sort of assist in that kind of resetting period. Now, there are studies out there. There are some people that take melatonin long term. And there isn't necessarily, those people don't necessarily report side effects. Some people report that they feel immune to it. So melatonin in and of itself is nice because it's natural, right? We make our own melatonin. So you are taking something, quote unquote, that your body already produces, right? But then it's a difficult thing to assess whether the melatonin that we're then giving you, does that then cause as a reflex, cause your melatonin to drop a little?
Yeah.
So are we artificially like giving this, and then when we remove it, is it yours going to bounce back, return back to normal? So it's used I don't typically recommend it for a chronic recommendation, but I feel like when we're trying to reset something, I feel like it's a pretty safe and easy thing to use.
Resetting the circadian cycle, because that's actually how the body uses melatonin. So
trying to mimic that with it artificially is like basically what the recommendation.
There was a good study. They went out, this is a circadian lab, they're very interested in human melatonin. They went out of the city lights. So one of the big things with university apartments are lights. Try to cut down the light, try to get light blocking curtains if you can. And I know most landlords probably are not investing a lot of money in the curtains and things like that. Do that if you can, because blocking out the light is really going to help. So they went out into the mountains, and they recorded their melatonin. And so melatonin in itself starts to rise in the human about the time that the sun goes down. So when light will suppress melatonin. So if you're sitting around at 11 o'clock at night with all the lights on, your melatonin is being suppressed, and that's going to wake you up. So
or keep you awake.
Or keep you awake. Yes. So taking melatonin a couple of hours before you want to go to sleep, that is part of that priming routine for the body. Now, it stays elevated while you sleep and then comes back down at the end when you wake up. And so you can sort of see that. But that's probably more what you want to mimic rather than taking it right before bed.
No, right, yeah.
And not high doses. I don't know what dose.
3 to 5.
So 2, like
really?
there's good evidence for 2 milligrams, 3 milligrams. When you start getting to 5 is on the high end.
Yeah, and some
above
people,
that
I even have some people who come in and tell me they're taking 10 and
10 or 20. There's something out there like 20 milligrams.
Yeah,
like,
I'm like, whoa.
Don't.
Melatonin.
Yeah, my recommendation usually I tell them is like 30 minutes. I'm like, okay, so here's your thing. I want you to take your melatonin. I want you to go do your warm shower. I want you to pack your lunch for the day. I want you to do whatever your routine is, and then you get in bed. And then the other tip about that too is you were talking about the sleep latency. So I usually caution people, if you're laying in bed and you're in bed for more than 10 minutes and 15 minutes and you haven't fallen asleep, you're getting back out of bed. Now you're not getting up and folding laundry like Tracy over here, and don't fold Tracy's laundry. You need to get up and do something. You need to do something calm and quiet with very, limited sort of, screen time type stuff. So I tell people sometimes, drawing is okay, journaling, something of that nature, type stuff until you kind of start to feel drowsy, and then you get back into bed to fall asleep while you're waiting for it. So.
And that's that associating bed with sleep. Something that's frustrating, right? You're not able to get to sleep, right? When you're not able to get to sleep, you're like, oh, if I can go to sleep now, I get 4 hours. Oh, if I can go to sleep right now, I get 2 hours. So it breaks that cycle where you're not frustrated in bed with.
Right.
I call that clock math.
Clock math.
You sit there and you're looking at it and you're going,
Tick, tick, tick.
I'm going to subtract all this time out.
Yeah, back and forth,
So that kind of goes into our next question. And I think you covered a little pieces of this through various questions we've asked before. But what do you do if you can't sleep other than, like, you mentioned getting up? Are there any other tips that we can do that can kind of help?
Well, I think that, I speak to people talking about doing meditation type things, right? Like there's lots of relaxation techniques out there, right? So you can do, I say massage, and people are like, well, I'm massaging myself. And it's like, well, yeah, sort of. I mean, in the sense that there are, hand, points on your fingers that you can do, hands on your temples to kind of calm yourself down. Slow down your breathing, right? We were talking about how the physiologic effects are things are going to start to kind of slow down, right? So these are things you can do. Again, temperature change, right? So warm drinks, obviously we would caution you against caffeinated warm drinks. But that same effect can happen if you get a warm drink, right? So make yourself a nice warm cup of milk or decaffeinated tea or something like that, where you're trying to kind of help mimic those behaviors and mimic what's going to happen physiologically to help kind of get you to bed. And it's hard. I try to tell, you have to really focus on your thoughts, because a lot of times that's what's keeping you and driving that motor is your brain. And so you have to really focus it on something else.
Yeah, and it can depend on what the root of the problem is. So the solution is going to depend on what underlies it. So if it is something where you're stressed, where you're perseverating on stuff, there are remedies that for that. Actually, there's a suggestion of take a half an hour, journal, talk about, get all of that sort of stress out, and then make a plan, and then go, okay, I'm done with that, now I need to move on, so that you're not consistently perseverating. So there's some psychological techniques like that. There are some interesting ones, and so in our research we've shown that if you're in an energy deficit, that can actually, so sort of, if let's say you didn't eat something, that then can wake one up and disrupt sleep. So it could be this warm glass of milk is actually a really, really good idea, because you have this protein, a little bit of sugar, all of that, then that the body goes, we're in a good place, and can go to sleep. So it may be things that you're aware of, it may be things that you're not aware of.
Right.
And you brought up caffeine in this. So caffeine is clearly a stimulant. It actually works in...
And a diuretic.
Yeah, and a diuretic. And it works against you directly in the pathway that we think is responsible for sleep. So it actually blocks the receptor for which that's what the sleep debt is. You're awake, you accumulate a sleep debt. The longer you're awake, the longer that debt is. Well, something has to be the counter. And the counter is a molecule we call adenosine. Well, caffeine blocks the adenosine receptor, so that adenosine can't actually get to the receptor and say, chalk up more debt. So then you sort of think,
I'm not tired.
I'm fine, I'm awake, I'm alert, but your debt is continuing to accrue. So this is the thing about caffeine. You can drink a bunch of caffeine, and then that caffeine crash, right, of these things, it's building up, and all of a sudden you just take away that artificial but and now it all comes flooding back, and you get sort of really tired. On average, it takes between 8 and 12 hours for a human to metabolize caffeine, a cup of coffee. So if you're having trouble sleeping, at, let's say, 11 o'clock at night, start counting backwards about 12 hours, and that's about the last caffeine that one should have during that day.
Wow.
And it can range, and some people are longer, some people are shorter with that, but that managing caffeine. So it could be that you have no sleep problems whatsoever, but you have a caffeine problem, and that can change. We were traveling at one point, and I used to be able to sort of have a cup of coffee with dessert and no problem, right? Okay, great. And then 4 hours later go to sleep. Well, on this last trip, it turns out, we were like, we'll have a cup of coffee with our dessert. It was 9 o'clock at night, and about 3 in the morning, my wife and I are both awake going, are you awake? Yeah, I'm still awake. Okay. They're trying to, it can change over your lifespan too. So both of us are sitting there and, okay, crap, we know what happened. It's like, we just got to wait it out at that point. So,
does that increase as you get older? Because I've noticed when I was younger, caffeine didn't seem to keep me up as much. And then the older I get, it just seems
it does. It has this effect.
I can attest to that too. When I was younger, I could consume all kinds of caffeine and never ever have a problem going to sleep. And I never needed caffeine either through all of medical school and residency and all of that type of sleep, lots of sleep deprivation involved in those activities, and I was fine. What drove me to consume caffeine is having children. and the sleep fatigue associated with that. And having kids and being older and needing caffeine and stuff. And so, it definitely changes throughout how you respond to it. And so a lot of our students are obviously younger, and so they probably aren't as maybe sensitive to it. But every person is different, and everybody's going to metabolize differently. So it's time to kind of take a self-reflection if that is something you're struggling with, and take a look and be like, wow, I do consume a lot more caffeine than I maybe thought I did.
Yeah, and then cut back, see if that has an impact, right? So it may be at the root of it.
But cut back gradually.
Yes.
So because that's the other drawback
Yes.
is if you stop and you take a hard look and you're like, wow, I consume way too much caffeine. And so you're like, I'm going to make that change. I applaud you. Good job. But you don't want to just cut caffeine because you'll be in at Student Health with us complaining of headache and fatigue and not being able to function. And so it is something that has to kind of be weaned off of gradually.
So does the same thing, like I know a lot of energy drinks have caffeine in them, but some of them also have a lot of other stuff. Like how do those kind of play into this whole thing too? Because I mean, energy drinks are massive in the college population.
Oh yes, I see it in my classes all the time. People sitting there.
Yeah, they have a lot of different like B vitamins, I think, are a big one, a lot of tyrosine, and all of those things act on your brain to affect how your sleep is working.
So tyrosine is going to be converted into dopamine, which is a stimulant.
Right.
So that will wake you up
Neurotransmitter,
that's what one of the modes of action of cocaine, right, is to elevate norepinephrine and dopamine. So that will keep you awake. There is something called taurine, which works in insects. It's a neurotransmitter. It's a minor neurotransmitter, but because it's minor, we don't actually know much of what it does in the body. So it could have it. There's also, is it guarana? There's that is in there that is converted into caffeine. So your body metabolizes, so they can say, we only have this much caffeine, but then as soon as it gets into your body, it then elevates your caffeine.
It's a pre-metabolite.
Oh, it's
and then
metabolite.
It gets,
Oh, wow.
And then it gets triggered and converted. So it's like think of it like a long-acting caffeine, like a boost of caffeine later on.
And a sneaky caffeine, right? Because they don't have to then claim that that's caffeine, as so they can say, oh, we're about a cup of coffee, right? But in actuality, by the time that you run down this list of ingredients, the amount of stimulants in it are way more than a cup of coffee.
That's crazy.
So it's an unregulated, and it doesn't kill too many people. There was just a recent report, depending on sort of your own internal conditions, these things have been blamed for certain deaths because it'll get the heart going.
Yeah, a lot of tachycardic stuff, and so you might not have known that you have a pre-existing arrhythmia, which is what happens. But then you take these things, and it drives your heart rate up, and then that drive and that heart rate then triggers something else in the heart and can put you into an arrhythmia that can lead to death. So no, is it itself going to kill you? No, but you don't know. And even people are like, well, I had one and I was fine. I did okay. I drank a Red Bull and it was fine. That doesn't necessarily,
but by the time
long term.
they're flavored, and so people will then go, oh, well, now I'll have two. Oh, okay, 2 is okay, now I'll have 3. And that's where this can really sort of be
And they combine them with alcohol and then
Oh, yeah, I've heard of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things we want to do is open up to the people who are in the room. So we've got a couple of people here in the room. Would you guys have any questions for our panelists to just ask about sleep hygiene, things that maybe we haven't covered in the questions today?
What about naps?
Naps. How do naps affect
That's a good question.
our sleep?
Yes, naps are complicated. Usually naps have shown to be helpful. Even a 10-minute nap, and actually even a 6-minute nap can improve your cognitive performance. Even though people don't feel less sleepy, there's good evidence that says it helps. When you start so the recommendation is either under 30 minutes or 90 minutes. And the reason the under 30 minutes is something that people have probably experienced, which is sleep inertia. So I was talking about the brain and how the brain kind of turns internally once you get into slow wave sleep and it starts paying attention to itself. It's hard to break out of that. And so just getting up, so if you get past about that 20 to 30 minute mark, then you're starting to get into slow wave sleep where the brain is turned in on itself, and then it's hard to break out of it. It could take, there are effects of sleep inertia that have been documented a couple hours even after getting up. Consequently, it's good to have a nap. It is, especially if it's needed, but I would sort of knowledgeably is how I would sort of say that.
Yeah, it shouldn't be your plan
No.
or goal daily to have a nap. But you know, I mean, it was a big thing back in the 90s, you know, Oprah and her like power naps,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like that was a big like thing. I'm just going to take a power nap. And so that's where that information, you know, and that study comes from. So yes, you can take that kind of quick 15, 20-minute power nap, but anything else you're really kind of hurting yourself unless you can kind of block out that full 90. And then I find what happens with a lot of my patients and students is that I'm just gonna do 90 minutes. I'm gonna lay down in just 90 minutes, but then they don't wake up or they don't get up because they still feel tired. That's the important part here. You're still gonna feel tired, even though if we were to give you a cognitive test, you might be more successful on it. You're still tired, so then you maybe don't get up if you don't have some specific place to go, and then you're there for 3 hours, or you're there for 4 hours. And now you just napped from 3 to 7, but you set your bedtime for midnight, and now you only have 5 hours, and so now you're in bed at midnight and you're laying there in bed. And so just like we said, you have to tread lightly and carefully about when you want to choose to kind of do these naps.
And that goes for weekend sleep as well. So that exact scenario that Dr. Dodd talked about is what we oftentimes see with on the weekends, right? Somebody will be up late on Friday night, right, out with friends, sleep in. Up late on Saturday, sleep in. And then now when you try to go to bed at Sunday night to get up for Monday and get prepared, it doesn't work because that sleep debt hasn't built up enough for you to actually fall asleep.
And so if you had to set a limit on somebody taking naps, would you say it's okay to take a nap a day within that time window of 90 minutes or a 20-minute power nap? Because I know when people will hear this, they might go, oh,
I would prefer to reset your cycle and get you on a consistent schedule. I would use the nap for those times that kind of things come up and you kind of have to veer off what your normal consistent sleep schedule will be, because it's going to happen. There's going to be that extra project that takes a little bit of time. There's going to be that kid who's sick up at night, at night, and you're up at 3 a.m. taking care of them. Life happens. And so you have to kind of be able to, but with this knowledge that we're trying to, give to you guys, you want to know that like, okay, I can take this, but I should do it smartly. I should take that quick little 20-minute power nap while the baby's napping, or, I know I have to go take that test, so I'm going to take a quick little nap here because I didn't, get as good of sleep as I wanted. Use it as a tool in your back pocket.
And a place that some of the students may encounter this is driving. So depending on their commute, let's say after finals, right? Everybody's got to leave the dorms by a certain time. I have a problem with sometimes with the scheduling that's set up because they work, and then all of a sudden Friday night or Saturday morning they're saying, okay, you've got to get out right now, and so balancing all of that, what gets sacrificed, of course, is sleep. Then you're on the road driving, and there was the best rolling down the window helps for about under a minute, right? So that's not turn up the radio, same thing. Right. There was a guy that tested this, a cantankerous man down in Australia named Jim Horn, but they tested something and the thing that worked the best is what he called a caffeine nap. So it takes a little while for caffeine to actually get into your system. So his recommendation was drink a cup of coffee and then go to sleep for about 10 minutes. That allows that caffeine to get into your system. It's enough that you feel better, right? And cognitively you feel a little bit more refreshed. By that time the caffeine has kicked in and away you go. Right? This is his remedy
That's ingenious.
But it's practical advice, which is, look, if there is a situation that is probably the most dangerous for our students, it is driving drowsy and not paying attention, right? Texting and driving but driving drowsy is probably something that every student has probably done, and it is a dangerous thing to do.
Sure, you're driving home from Thanksgiving, you're going home after the end of the semester, and people going home on the weekends.
Right,
I'm just going to get home at the end of the class, and I'm going and, absolutely. Yeah, great.
So,
all right, awesome.
Did we have any more? You guys have any other questions?
Well, so allergies and probably anxiety might be two of my driving challenges with sleep, turning off the brain, but allergies, sometimes it's hard to wake up, because you gotta be awake to make the coffee. And I'm not gonna go back to bed after I'm up, but
Yeah.
what are some other ways to get going when it's really hard to wake up and get going? And
So
I take care of my allergies though.
Some
But
tips.
not everybody knows.
Yeah, some tips they talk about. So like obviously the best goal would be that you wake up naturally, right? But I would say probably at least I'd say probably at least 80 to 90% of people still have to set an alarm. So the tips are about don't just put the alarm next to your bed, right? So physically get yourself out of bed. So put your alarm across the room, so you physically have to get out of bed. There's something about once you're literally up,
Yes.
sitting up, that kind of triggers your body and brain to go, okay, time to wake
Yep.
up, we're gonna do this now. If you just continue to lay in bed and slap the snooze button over and over and over again, that is going to continue so setting that across the way.
Yeah.
Some people have turn on the lights, right? So we were talking to you about how lights, you want to dim the lights to go to sleep. When we're trying to wake up, you want lights to be on,
Yes.
right? So at that point, if you do have the alarm next to you, you should turn on your lamp on your nightstand so that your light starts to wake you up, right? Or flip on a TV because loud noise is going to be triggering you. These are things that are going to make you more awake as you get up.
And that's when we're setting those schedules as well, that light is really important. So one of the things that we don't get a lot of is sunlight. And so we talked about trying to go to sleep with the melatonin and setting the stage for going to sleep. On the other side, what starts that whole cycle for most animals is light. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that you want to do actually in the morning is get bright light. That then starts your clock.
Put up the shades.
Put up the shades. Get out into the sun. Something like this probably is about 1,000 lux, maybe, about with light-wise. Out in the sun, it's 100,000 lux or more, right? Our metrics, the meters top out at 100,000 lux. And so you want to get out and do that because that's going to help that cycle. Now, that's going to help you get a time to wake up, but also go to bed because your body is sort of timed that way. It can help set that timing. And light therapy actually is.
I was like, we're going into seasonal, very time now, obviously, where we're going to have less light, right? We're heading into fall and into winter. And right now, people can probably notice that it's dark when you're getting up, right? And because we haven't switched the clocks, right? So the clocks are going to fall back, so we're going to have more light during the day. That's going to help you fall asleep at night because it's going to be dark at 6 o'clock at night. So that part is very helpful. But right now, while we're waiting to change the clocks, it's dark in the morning and it's a real struggle. It makes it a lot harder to get out of bed. And so people will use, light therapy. Some people use it to help them, wake up so that they can, feel better. So that's something you want to do.
Yeah. So what you do in the morning will also impact what happens at night. With the allergies, I actually take an allergy pill at night before I go to bed because of respiratory stuff. So we're talking about the smoking, right? If you will wake up and you will not get as good a sleep if you are wheezing, if you are sort of inflamed in your lungs. Asthma tends to happen and impact things at night. Yep. Allergies.
They say it's like 3 or 4 a.m. is the worst time for coughing and sleeping. So my background is as a pediatric doctor, and so when I worked in the peds ER, between the hours of 2 and 5 a.m. are the classic times for small children to come in with their croupy coughs, with their asthma exacerbations. Mom and dad are like, I don't know, Johnny was fine. I put him down to bed. He had a mild cough. What's going on? Because there is actual data and physiologic body change going on during those restorative times that triggers their breathing.
Yeah, blood pressure medications also before you go to bed because it seems to be more healthy to have this, what they call dipping.
Yeah, the dip at night.
At night, because everything's sort of calm. Again, the body is trying to go into this more sort of, it's scaled down. Now, this is not just a restful period where the body's not doing anything. It's actually quite active and and sleep is a thing. It's not just a blank period where things go back to normal. It's actively done. And so this is, that's what you want, is to sort of mimic those.
Most of your allergy pills are antihistamines, which have a tendency to make people drowsy, and so that helps.
And that's the thing, is in the morning, right, you also want to balance that, because maybe if you take it at night, and then some of that might be
too lingering. It can linger, so it just depends on how sedating, how much sedative effect your medication has.
Yeah.
This has been fantastic. So a lot of good questions.
I want to bring up two things before we go that are with sleep disorders, because this is something that can really impact a student's sleep and they may not know it. So the first is sleep apnea. That's usually associated with older men, right? In fact, more and more we look, it's happening in younger and younger populations. And especially, so here's where you get this feed-forward loop, actually, of like not very healthy eating, not very healthy lifestyle, putting on weight. That is a very big risk factor for sleep apnea. And so it's much more present in women than we had thought at one point, and children even. That there are a lot of kids that have sleep apnea. So consider that, think about that, because even if you're in bed and asleep for 9 hours, if you're sleeping in that case, in fact, people with sleep apnea will oftentimes sleep more than those 8 hours. And they'll say, oh, well, I need 9 hours of sleep, I need this. So that is a big, and it's treatable. It's very, very treatable. So
the majority of sleep apnea is typically an obstructive sleep apnea. So to explain the kind of what that is, so when you are laying down, you're basically blocking the airway in some manner. Sometimes it's large tonsils or adenoids. Sometimes you just have a small oropharynx. Oropharynx is the back part of your mouth. Sometimes you have a large tongue. All of these things, and some people it's just how they're built, right? Some people have shorter necks and things of that nature. So there are some things you can try to do to help with that. Obviously, if it's severe enough, then you qualify for what we call as a CPAP machine, and that has pressurized air while you're breathing to help keep that airway open. But even if you kind of have a more mild case, sometimes you can pick this up with snoring. Now, not every person who has sleep apnea snores, but that can be a good clue from time to time. So you can speak with a physician. Sometimes there's allergies involved, right? So if you have a lot of nasal passage blockage, we can help with those types of things. A lot of times your sleep apnea is made worse if you're laying on your back. That's just because of gravity and your anatomy and how things are set up. So some of the tricks that we'll do with some people that they can try is like put a tennis ball on the, tape it on the back of their of a t-shirt, and so then you won't lay on your back while you sleep. If you have a person who's in the same room as you, they can kind of alert you or wake you with the snoring. So there are some things to do, but if you're concerned about that, you can certainly come in. We can help, refer people to the right spot for evaluation for that. But yeah, it is definitely a much more common problem, especially with, as we find populations becoming, more obese and having problems with that.
So it's bleeding down as we go. And the short-term consequences are sleepiness. So you're not going to learn as well. You're going to be falling asleep in class. You're going to be doing, it's harder to pay attention, it's harder to hold it, and in fact people will fall asleep while they're driving because they're so tired. Long term, we're talking about cardiovascular problems, we're talking diabetes, so it's been associated with a lot of problems, including neuronal death, which means your brain's shrinking. Right, so it's been associated with it. So the earlier you can get that treated, you stop the damage, and then can move on with the rest of your life. And I know many people that will not go anywhere that they cannot bring their CPAP because it made that much of a change immediately, like within hours.
And there's so much new technology in regards to CPAPs too. Like, so people think like, oh, a CPAP is some like big suitcase-sized machine or something that you have to take with you. And no, I mean, they're quite portable. I mean, very small. You plug it in, you got a tiny little mask, and you're off to go. So they make all kinds of different.
They even have a new one now that they implant, don't they?
Yeah, that's a newer
It's a
type of a
newer
thing that
type
it's
one,
supposed
yeah.
to be able to trigger.
Gotta be like a chronic state
Yes,
of
yes,
having
probably a much more
It's not like a
invasive.
vagal nerve stimulator
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So there are different, definitely different technologies, but if you don't come in and ask for assistance and evaluation, then
Yeah.
we certainly can't
Yeah.
get you the help.
And then the other is narcolepsy. Just because it's rare, it has a huge impact. It's sort of at the college age, it tends to happen or occur more in females than males at this particular age, but it can really, really impact your performance, and it oftentimes can be just written off by somebody that's not paying attention as you just need to get more sleep, right? You just need to do this, you just need to do this, and then gets put back off on the person until somebody with an awareness then sends them to the sleep clinic, and then they go, oh, you have narcolepsy, and then again, treatable. It can make a real big difference. So I just want to bring both of those up because it can happen to students around this age.
Yeah, so what would be the warning signs for those conditions? Like what would let a student know that there's a possibility that they have a sleep disorder of some kind? Not necessarily just those two, but just in general.
So sleepiness during the day that can't be explained by just staying up, right? So you're really making an effort to go to bed, to do all the things that we talked about with the purposefully attending to sleep.
Sleep hygiene.
Sleep hygiene, that you don't, it doesn't have the right, it doesn't resolve the problem. Narcolepsy is much harder than sleep apnea. Sleep apnea, usually you see an accompanying weight gain of quick, like maybe 5 to 10 pounds that all of a sudden will go up. Snoring is, so not everybody that snores has sleep apnea, but about 88% of people with sleep apnea snore.
Wow.
So when that snoring starts and
And I'm talking like snoring like all
Yeah.
the time, right? So like if you have a head cold,
Yes.
you're gonna snore, right? Like that. It's like we're talking like chronic snoring all of the time, and a lot of times it's hard because some students live alone, so
Yes,
they're like,
yes.
I don't know if I snore.
Yeah.
So then I will tell them sometimes to record, like put on a recording overnight and see what happens.
And there are sleep apps that you can download. They are free, that will record or will turn on when you snore. And so what you're then listening for is not just the snoring, but the gasping snoring.
Yeah.
Big breaks. So what will happen with people with sleep apnea oftentimes?
Long pause.
Yeah.
Long pause.
Very scary.
Yes.
It's very scary.
So I know of a patient that went 2.5 minutes without breathing.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, during the night.
2.5 minutes?
2.5 minutes. And this was not, this person also would snore so loudly that their children were afraid of what was in the room when they were young and like wouldn't go in because there was a monster in the room. So the point being that that it has this, like, it has these telltale signs, and that snoring that sort of with gasping and breaks, that would be a real indicator for me for sleep apnea. But outside of that, also waking up thinking that you're choking, so that's something that will be reported. Dry mouth, because oftentimes people are breathing
Mouth
through
breathing.
their mouth. So those would be and then daytime sleepiness, that you're really just tired during the day, because that's a hallmark of sleep apnea. And that's the one that people will use their CPAP because they're like, oh my gosh, I can wake up on time, I feel refreshed, oh my gosh, the world has changed because of this device. And you get there slowly. It doesn't happen one day, like all of a sudden, like, oh, now I feel like crap. It's you habituate, the body habituates, and you just sort of had this slow decline into the stage, and by the time that some people recognize it, it's gone down a long ways as far as performance, and there's kind of no getting back to it. You can only just level it off at that point. With narcolepsy, it gets a little bit harder to do that, but actually the ironic thing with narcolepsy, it's hard to fall asleep at night, and people will fall asleep during the day, and it's not like falling asleep in your mashed potatoes, like, you know, comics of like all of a sudden somebody will just go, right, and do that. That's not what happens. It does happen like that, but there are triggers and that will do this, and oftentimes it's emotion. There's an accompanying diagnosis or comorbidity that goes along with it, and I'm blanking on it right now, and it's basically losing muscle tone.
Oh,
And- yeah.
like a hypotonia type of picture?
So something like that. So
Okay.
somebody might tell a joke, and all of a sudden you.
Oh,
there's
and they
an
kind of go
emotional-
flaccid or like.
Yes.
Okay.
And so
Yeah,
it starts,
hypotonia.
and it sort of starts that's one of the places you'll recognize. Some people will recognize it is a joke or good food or something like that, and they'll get a little bit with this emotional response. They'll just get a little bit of this hypotonia. And there's a collection of dogs that have narcolepsy. And so, yes, there's a really good video, really good video with out of the National Health Service in Britain talking about the dog. So the owner's talking about the dog, and the male shows up, and the dog gets all excited that this male is showing up and barking, and all of a sudden he'll just fall over. And its eyes are still open, but it can't move, which is interesting because that is what happens during REM sleep. The eyes can still move, and you're not conscious when you're in REM sleep, but that same thing happens where the whole body goes limp, basically, and then.
My aunt had a goat like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Goats also will do this. Yes.
Yeah.
Like you would surprise the goat won't.
Yep. And so.
Wow.
Interesting.
So those can be indicators, and there is people also with narcolepsy will fall asleep rather than going, what I said was stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then REM sleep. They'll fall asleep directly into REM sleep, and so there is a connection between narcolepsy and REM sleep.
And that's what they can pick up on, like when
Yeah.
you go for a sleep study, they can
Yeah.
see
You
how
see
that
it.
works. Yeah.
It's very important to get.
But it usually manifests itself as just an unrelenting tiredness at times during the day.
Yeah. I think it's good to identify because once you identify, you should get the treatment for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it can be handled, and there are people that have left school because people just say, "Oh, you're not getting enough sleep. You're just tired. You're not getting enough sleep," and they're not able to sort of
Succeed and
function.
function.
Acquire knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Because they're not able to stay asleep or stay awake in class.
Well, they're called lazy.
Well, yeah,
Because they're-
exactly.
because
And so
they're
they
always tired all the
yep,
time.
Yep.
Well,
Very
and
much.
I think that's, and when Amber and I were talking about sleep, that was one of the main reasons we did this podcast was because we want students to succeed. And we
Yeah.
want people to understand that sleep is so important to
Mm-hmm.
their health. And, we see so many students who come over to student well-being, and I know for me, and I'm pretty sure for you too, that's one of our very first things we look at is, what is your sleep like?
Yeah.
And when you look at that key indicator of, can you identify what your sleep schedule's like, and then, having them understand that there's so many things that go into that sleep, and how do we identify what can we do for your sleep, and bringing up everything that you brought up today is just phenomenal, because I think as students listen to this, they're going to go, oh, I think I relate to that.
Yeah.
I think I can pull some of those things out and glean from that, so that I may fit there, and I can do those things. I can reset, and I can fit to that. So yeah,
That there is hope.
there's hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for joining us today.
Welcome. Thank you for having us.
And
Yeah.
you as well, so.
Thank you to our listeners and our individuals that have shown up in person for our first ever panel. If you have any further questions or any additional topics that you would like to see us cover, please email us at wellbeing@mst.edu. And if you've not had the chance, please check out our podcast, Morning Cup of Joe. It's available on Spotify, Stitcher, Anchor, and Pandora.
Thank you, miners, and have a great
For
day.
more information about mental health and wellness, contact Student Wellbeing at 204 Norwood Hall. And you can also give us a call at 573-341-4211.
The song Happy Days is brought to us by music from www.free-stock-music.com. You can also add and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook using our handle @S&T Wellbeing.